Silence. That is the new sound of the Russian economy. Not the roar of tank engines, not the applause of propaganda shows, but the terrifying silence of assembly lines coming to a halt. A few weeks ago, we told you that the trucks had stopped. We warned you that 7,000 transport companies were bankrupt and that the highways, the arteries of the nation, were blocked. You watched that video hundreds of thousands of times. You saw the warning signs. But today, the disease has spread from the arteries to the heart. The collapse is no longer just on the roads. It has entered the factories, the shopping malls, and even the holiday dinner tables. Major industrial plants are switching to a 4-day work week. Restaurants are closing their doors for the first time since the war began. And in a humiliation that would make the czars turn in their graves, Russia, the land of vast pastures, has begun importing cheese from China. Vladimir Putin promised a return to the glory of the Soviet Union. Congratulations, Mr. President, you have succeeded. The empty shelves, the silent factories, and the austere New Year celebrations of 1991 are back. Today, on the Static Dispatch, we are not just looking at logistics. We are witnessing the de-industrialization of a superpower in real time. Before we show you why Russian families are canceling New Year's Eve and why retailers predict a 50% market collapse in 2026, hit that subscribe button. The mainstream media shows you the missiles. We show you the empty fridge that will actually end this war. Let us go back to the source of the infection. We told you that Russian road transport was facing an unprecedented collapse. Trans.info and multiple industry sources confirmed that the freight market is in its deepest crisis in 17 years. Fuel is too expensive. Parts for Western trucks are non-existent. Drivers are dead or in the trenches. But what happens when the trucks stop bringing raw materials to the factories? The factories stop too. It is a brutal, simple chain reaction. Independent economic analysis has revealed a bombshell reality. Production in Russia is being drastically reduced. Factories across the country are quietly switching to a 4-day work week. Why? Because they do not have the parts to assemble, because they do not have the trucks to ship the finished goods, and because they do not have the workers to man the machines. This 4-day week is a trick. It is a Soviet-style lie to hide unemployment. Instead of firing workers and causing mass protests, they cut their hours and their pay. It is a slow death. Imagine you are a factory worker in the Urals. Your salary was already eaten by inflation. Now your paycheck is cut by 20% because the factory is closed on Fridays. You still have a job on paper, but you can no longer feed your family in reality. This is the industrial heart attack we warned about. The blood, the cargo stopped flowing, and now the organs, the factories, are dying. But if the factory stopping is a tragedy, what is happening to food is a national humiliation. In our last report, we talked about the butter crisis. We told you how supermarkets were locking butter in security boxes because people were stealing it. We told you how dairy producers absurdly blamed the shortage on Russians eating too much ice cream. The situation has not improved. It has mutated. Russia is the largest country in the world. It has endless land for agriculture. Yet multiple trade sources report a fact that sounds like a joke, but is a tragedy. China has started selling cheese to Russia. Let that sink in. Russia, a country with a 1,000-year history of dairy farming, is now dependent on Beijing for cheese. Why? Because the Russian dairy supply chain is broken. The trucks to move the milk from the farm to the factory are too expensive. The packaging materials previously imported from Europe are gone. The machinery in the cheese factories is German or Italian, and it is breaking down without spare parts. So the Kremlin turns to its new master, China. This is not just about cheese. This is about sovereignty. Putin talks about a multipolar world and Russian independence. But what kind of independence is it when you cannot even put a slice of cheese on your bread without China's permission? The butter theft was a sign of poverty. The Chinese cheese is a sign of submission. The rot has moved from the factory floor to the store floor. For 20 years, the symbol of Putin's stability was the glittering shopping mall. The Russian middle class could buy Western clothes, eat at food courts, and feel like Europeans. That dream is officially dead. Financial analysis from banking sector reports reveals terrifying data. Consumer spending on clothing and footwear crashed by 8% in November 2025 compared to last year. Russians have stopped buying clothes. They are wearing what they have until it falls apart. This is survival mode. Prominent clothing manufacturers and marketplace sellers have given chilling predictions. They say 2025 was hard, but 2026 will be even harder. Industry experts predict that 50% of all marketplace sellers will withdraw from the market in 2026. Half of them gone. Why? Because taxes are rising to fund the war, because logistics costs have exploded due to the transport collapse, because advertising is too expensive. Offline stores are closing in waves. Multiple retail sector analyses indicate that 80% of shopping centers have seen a massive drop in visitors. Walk through a mall in St. Petersburg today, it is a ghost town. The lights are dim to save electricity. The storefronts are boarded up. The few people walking around are not carrying shopping bags. They are just looking for a place to stay warm. The Russian consumer economy, the engine that kept the domestic peace, has run out of fuel. It is not just the shops, it is the plates. Media reports indicate that Russia's restaurant sector has shrunk for the first time since the 2022 mobilization. Even during the early days of the war, Russians kept eating out. It was a way to pretend everything was normal. Now that illusion is too expensive to maintain. Costs for ingredients have surged. Remember the potato inflation? Remember the butter theft? Restaurants have to pass those costs to the customer, but the customer has no money. Traffic to restaurants and bars is down significantly. This is the end of the middle-class lifestyle in Russia. When you cannot afford a new shirt, and you cannot afford a meal out, and you are working a 4-day week for less pay, you are no longer middle class. You are the new Soviet proletariat. And now we approach the most sacred holiday in Russian culture, New Year's Eve. Traditionally, this is a time of excess. Tables groaning with food, caviar, champagne, gifts for the children. But economic analysis reports a heartbreaking reality for 2025. Russians are preparing to celebrate with strict austerity measures. Families are cutting back on everything. Instead of champagne, cheap vodka. Instead of caviar, fake substitutes. Instead of piles of gifts, maybe one small item or nothing at all. The Olivier salad, the staple of the Russian New Year, has become a luxury item because the price of eggs, potatoes, and mayonnaise has soared. The patriotic war on television is not putting food on the table. The government tells them to be proud of the captured villages in Ukraine, but you cannot eat a captured village. The mood in the country is not celebratory. It is exhausted. It is the exhaustion of a people who know that next year will be worse than this one. But the factories are halting for another darker reason. Even if the trucks arrived, even if the parts were delivered, there is no one left to operate the machines. Russia is facing demographic suicide. The unemployment rate is at a record low. State television calls this a success. We call it a graveyard statistic. Unemployment is low because the men are gone. Over 500,000 men are estimated dead or wounded in Ukraine. Another million, the smartest and most skilled, fled the country to avoid the draft. Who is left to drive the trucks? Who is left to fix the pipelines? Who is left to bake the bread? Industry reports mention that factories are desperate. They are hiring pensioners, teenagers, and people with no experience. We are seeing grandmothers trying to operate heavy machinery. We are seeing IT specialists being forced to drive forklifts. This is a zombie economy. It looks alive because money is moving, but the body is dead. Without skilled labor, accidents are skyrocketing. Industrial fires are becoming common, not just from reported sabotage, but from incompetence and exhaustion. Putin wanted to rebuild an empire, but he forgot that an empire needs people to build it. He has fed Russia's future into the meat grinder of the Donbass. The collapse is not just on the frozen highways, it is terrifyingly real at 30,000 feet. While the trucking industry dies, the aviation industry is playing Russian roulette with passengers' lives. Since the sanctions began, Boeing and Airbus cut off all spare parts and software updates. For 3 years, Russian airlines have survived by cannibalizing their fleets. They strip parts from one plane to keep another flying, but now they are running out of planes to strip. Recent industry reports indicate that Russian pilots are being told to ignore minor mechanical failures. Brakes that are worn out, fly anyway. Sensors that are glitching, ignore them. Flying in Russia today is a gamble. Why does this matter for the economy? Because Russia spans 11 time zones. You cannot drive everywhere, especially now that the trucks are broken. Businessmen cannot travel to meetings. Engineers cannot fly to fix remote oil wells. The country is becoming disconnected. Vladivostok feels like a different planet from Moscow. The glue that held the Federation together, transportation, is dissolving. When you cannot move goods by road and you cannot move people by air, you do not have a country. You have a collection of isolated, starving islands. And what happens when these isolated islands freeze? Winter 2025 has brought another enemy, the infrastructure collapse. While Putin spends billions on hypersonic missiles to destroy Ukraine's heating grid, his own cities are freezing. Across Russia, from the Moscow suburbs to Siberia, communal heating pipes are bursting. These pipes were laid in the Soviet era. They needed replacing 20 years ago. But the money for repairs was stolen by corruption or diverted to the war chest. Now the metal is fatigued, the pressure is too high. Boom. Entire neighborhoods are left without heat in minus 20-degree weather. We are seeing images of ice coating the inside of apartment walls. We are seeing families sleeping in winter coats, huddled around dangerous electric heaters. This is the ultimate betrayal. The energy superpower that threatened to freeze Europe is now watching its own citizens turn into ice blocks. The government's response? They blame the West, they blame sabotage, but the real saboteur is negligence. The plumbers and welders who could fix these pipes are in the trenches holding a rifle instead of a wrench. The infrastructure war is lost, and in this chaos, who is the winner? It is not Ukraine. It is not the West. It is the dragon in the East. We mentioned the Chinese cheese, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. China is not saving Russia. China is buying Russia at a discount. With European markets closed, Russia is forced to sell its oil and gas to Beijing for pennies on the dollar. Russian trucks are replaced by Chinese trucks that break down in the cold. Russian cars are replaced by Chinese cars that cost double the price. Russian savings are converted into yuan because the ruble is toxic. Russia is becoming a resource colony for Chinese industry, a gas station with nukes managed by Beijing. The sovereignty Putin fights for is gone. He traded dependence on the West for subservience to the East. And unlike the West, China does not care about Russian human rights or living standards. They only care about cheap resources. The transport collapse we see today benefits China. It makes Russia weak, desperate, and willing to sign any deal to keep the lights on. The bear is sick, and the dragon is waiting to feast. We keep coming back to 1991 because the parallels are no longer just similarities. They are a mirror image. In the late Soviet era, the factories were still running, but they were making tanks instead of tractors. The fields were full of crops, but the trucks were broken, so the food rotted. The news was full of victories, but the fridge was empty. Look at Russia today. International media outlets report that Putin's economy is in tatters as industry collapses. The transport sector is dead. The factories are slowing down. Russia is dependent on foreign powers, China, for basic food. This is the Sovietization of the market, centralization, shortages, black markets, theft. When ordinary people resort to theft, the social contract is broken. When the logistics chain snaps, the empire snaps. Putin calls the collapse of the Soviet Union a tragedy, yet he is rebuilding the exact conditions that caused it. He thinks empires die on the battlefield, but history teaches us that empires die in the bread line. They die when the truck does not arrive. They die when the factory goes silent. They die when the father looks at his children on New Year's Eve and has nothing to give them. Russia has entered the spiral. The trucks stopped first, now the factories, next the cities. What do you think? Are we watching the final chapter of the Russian Federation? Can an economy survive on Chinese cheese and war propaganda? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. If you want to understand the economic reality that will end this war, subscribe to the Static Dispatch. We track the collapse one empty shelf at a time. Stay fed, stay safe. Thanks for watching.